Morning, folks. Very warm welcome to you all. My name's Paul. I'm the founder and CEO of Trickle. I've got the pleasure of hosting today's Be the Change webinar, and today's topic is creating a psychologically safe workplace, building a speak up culture. This morning, well, I'll be honest, we're meant to be joined by two lovely experts. At the moment, we've got one, which is Aliya. Good morning, Aliya. We're hopeful that Sue will be able to join us, who's Aliya's co-founder in Journey HR. And if she does, we'll let her on as soon as she can get in. But today, Aliya and myself are going to be having a fireside chat on the theme of psychological safety, and in particular, how it plays into the new Worker Protection Act that came into force 6 weeks ago. We'll have 15 minutes or so at the end to answer any questions that come in from you guys in the audience. So please do use the chat tool to post any questions or topics that you would like to hear Aliya and myself and hopefully Sue discuss on the call. So let's get going. Aliya, very warm welcome to you. Can I please start by asking you to introduce yourself to our audience and also just to provide a background to Journey HR and the key services that you provide to your customers?
Thank you so much, Paul, and good morning to everybody who is joining. My name is Aliya Vigor-Robertson. I'm the co-founder of Journey HR, an HR consultancy dedicated to support small to medium-sized businesses. We've been going for 15 years. Our passion is to deliver HR with excellence. HR has taken on a really wide mantle of responsibilities over the past 15 years. I have a team of 20 brilliant HR experts at various different levels and layers who provide outsourced solutions for our clients to help them build brilliant places to work. That is our passion, that's our ambition, and that's what we love getting up and doing every day. So it's a pleasure to be speaking on a topic that is so important today in terms of how companies can create safe spaces, and not only their legal obligations, but also their moral ones too. The kind of clients that we love working with, we've worked with some absolutely fantastic businesses over the past 15 years, from the team at Jamie Oliver to the team at Vice. So yeah, we've had lots of fun along these last 15 years, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences around this important topic today.
Thank you so much, Aliya. So we're going to talk about two things, right? Psychological safety is obviously a key theme. We're going to talk about the Worker Protection Act, but let's talk about psychological safety first of all. So what is it? How would you define it? What's psychological safety in the workplace?
So this is a term that I think has been used over the past couple of years, and I think it's been used in lots of different contexts. So I think the first thing that I just want to share in terms of my perspective around psychological safety and being really clear about what that is, from my perspective, it is about understanding that the psychological safety is about balancing comfort and discomfort. So what this means is this balance enables employees to take well-calibrated risks, particularly the type that involve people speaking up. And it's the speaking up bit that we need to focus on today, suggesting new solutions and experimenting with new approaches. That's what we want to hear from people. I think psychological safety has, as I mentioned just a moment ago, has just been slightly misunderstood. Sometimes people can think that psychological safety can mean that you can have a very comfortable, risk-free environment, so people can just be themselves at work. And I think that can sometimes be very dangerous. We have to come to work in a professional space. So if you were somebody who was comfortable just to be yourself, being grumpy, being irritable, being non-collaborative isn't necessarily helpful for everybody else. So from a psychological safety perspective, I think sometimes these comfort zones that sometimes are associated with psychological safety, when people misunderstand it, can be limiting. Sue's now on the call, so it's brilliant
Welcome,
to have
Sue.
her here.
Can you hear us and can you talk?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, Aliya's doing a wonderful job. My team's just decided not to work, having worked right up to this moment. So I'm very sorry, but I am here. My IT are amazing.
Delighted you can be here. So Sue, just before we dive any deeper into psychological safety, do you want to just give Aliya's done an intro to herself and to Journey HR, but do you just want to quickly introduce yourself and your background, please?
Of course. Hi, everyone. Very, very sorry for the delay. But yes, I'm Sue. I work alongside Aliya at Journey HR. We've been together we've been friends for over 20 years, but run the business for 15 together. And yeah, a little bit about my background. I am a psychology graduate, continued to sort of study that in huge detail as part of my career, as well as doing a master's, and just really, really enjoy sort of using psychology in my work. I'm a non-exec chief people officer at a couple of other businesses, as well as obviously co-running Journey HR with Aliya. So really just enjoy working at a super sort of strategic and leadership level in my clients. So that's just a bit about
Thank you, Sue. So you've only missed the very start, right? So we were kind of talking about what actually is psychological safety, and Aliya just gave a kind of really good insight into what that actually is, as opposed to some of the perceptions of what that is. Maybe I'll ask you to say why it's so critical in your view to fostering a healthy organizational culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think psychological safety sits at the core of that. And I think what you see very sort of strong psychological safety garnering great cultures. I think what happens is when companies really understand what it is, when you kind of talk about that balance of comfort and discomfort. I'm not sure whether Ali has spoken to that piece
She did,
yet.
yeah.
But that's the critical element. It's about sort of embracing the fear. I don't think you can advance a culture without that little bit of fear, that little bit of tension, a bit of friction. It's the healthiness around the challenge. It's the space where you can say to somebody, I don't agree, but let me explain why. I think there's a real sort of fear around doing that, and sometimes we end up stagnating as businesses because we're sort of scared to reach out, scared to speak up and say that you don't agree. So having that lovely sort of tension around little bit of comfort zone stretchy. That I don't feel hugely comfortable saying this, but I'm going to put myself out there. I think that's where innovation comes from, in terms of really pushing yourself to say what's on your mind.
I love that. And we're going to talk a lot about compliance, but where I first came across psychological safety, I'm a techie, by the way, I don't know if you guys knew that, but I used to be a software engineer. So where I first came across psychological safety was Google's study, which was probably 10 years ago now. And they did a study across their whole workplace, which was what are the most common factors in our highest performing teams. And I think it was surprising to everyone that psychological safety came back as the number one thing, which they defined as being the ability to speak up without negative consequences. Mm-hmm. But what I like about the insights that you guys are bringing to this is that kind of that midpoint, right, between taking risks and, but doing it in a way that's kind of with the culture and for the purpose of progressing the organization. I saw a quote the other day. I really liked this. I wrote it down. Psychological safety. You might not agree with this. The sweet spot where the best work happens. I thought that was quite good.
Yeah, it really is. And what you've described there is that sweet space, because what you've got to do is understand where your comfort zone is. And that's different for everyone, right? So my comfort zone shape and size will be very different to yours, Paul, very different to yours, Aliya. But it's almost like where am I prepared to go in terms of that push, that stretch for me? And it is that real sort of tension between the balance of what's comfortable for me and what's pushing me to feel uncomfortable. But that's where progress comes.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's talk about kind of signs and indicators. So what are some early indicators that an organization is promoting psychological safety, and how can leaders sustain it? And that's to both of you or either of you, whoever you feel comfortable with.
Amazing. I'll pick it up first. I think when you really see an organization who is getting it right, who is promoting psychological safety in that healthy way, and it's being acknowledged and embraced as well by the rest of the people in that organization, what you will start to see are things like enhanced productivity. You will see higher performance and high performing teams, where again that sort of level of trust. I think when you look at high performance team modeling by Lencioni back in the day, that bedrock of trust is the most important thing to to solidify before you can then start moving into high performance. So you will start to see that synergy between trust and between psychological safety. So what will happen is high performance, better productivity. You'll also probably see quite a bit less turnover. People will be more engaged with the organisation. They will want to stay. They will want to keep growing and improving together. So turnover will go down. Innovation will go up, because that stretch is happening. Things aren't staying stagnant. Things are changing and moving, and we're trying new things together. And it doesn't matter if we fail, because we've got that bedrock of trust. So we try together. We might fail on this one, but at least we learn something. So you will see indications of people trying stuff that might be outside of the comfort zone. It might be different. It's very, very likely that you'll see enhanced financial performance as well as a result of all of those things, as a result of higher performance. And there are some stats as well, actually. I think there's some lovely stats that come out of the Google research, and we've also got some from Gallup as well, where they surveyed thousands of people, and essentially what came out of that was they found there was 21% higher profitability in the businesses that reported higher levels of psychological safety. There was also 17% rise in productivity, and wonderfully 41% dip in absenteeism. So those are the types of things you'll see: less turnover, less sickness, more productivity, more innovation.
And I think that those things are really important, because a lot of the times there'll be a question, what's the business case for making a change, right? Why are we going to change our culture? Now, one of the aspects is compliance, and we'll come on to that.
Yeah.
But if there is a bottom line benefit, then it just makes it much easier for organizations to actually embrace that change. And it's good. I think the tricky thing is, when it comes to innovation, a lot of the times you don't know what's going to come from your people, right? If you've got an environment where people are happy to speak up about the little things that aren't working. We talk about gross quite a lot, which is getting rid of stupid stuff. And it's like, when people are comfortable to speak up about that, then you don't know the efficiency savings that can be made, right? It's hard to predict, but after you run it for a few months, you can definitely see that things are improving, What about sustaining that over time? Have you got experience, any tips, or how do you embed it? We've talked about embedding it, but what about sustaining that?
You've got to measure it, because you've got to sort of know where you're beginning. You've got to know the start point. So how psychologically safe are we? And that's okay. And that's almost the first bit, the vulnerability piece, that is the sort of key to psychological safety. Let's get the mirror out and hold it up to ourselves as an organisation. How are we doing? Okay, maybe not so great. So what steps are we going to take to improve that? And then you continuously measure it and work out where you've got strength, work out where you've got gaps, and think about sustaining the strength, obviously by continuing to sort of nurture and add to the stuff that you feel you're doing really well. Acknowledge the gaps. It might well be that it's the usual one we find is feedback. So it's really, really hard to give constructive feedback in a sort of consistent and comfortable way. People often will shy away from giving feedback, and that's a real barrier to garnering psychological safety and sustaining it. So trying to shift your culture to one where feedback is role modeled by the leaders, where it is okay to disagree constructively and healthily, is another way of sustaining. But I think it's just knowing where you've got strength, looking after that strength, and then really tackling the areas that you need to improve in order to keep it at a level.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges we see is we work with a lot of large organizations, like thousands of employees in the public sector. And when you kind of think about psychological safety and potential culture change to get there at that scale, it can just seem like incredibly daunting. But I think being able to focus on that team by team and, say, okay, which of our teams is doing that really well and what can we learn from them? I think that's a really important thing as well, to try and, one, embed it, and two, then help sustain it. Okay, so let's talk about kind of practical approaches. Could you guys share any kind of practical day-to-day actions that leaders could take to cultivate a psychologically safe environment for their teams?
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to pick this one up, Paul. In terms of kind of the leadership aspect, I think one of the biggest changes leaders need to step into is really modeling that vulnerability and openness.
Yep.
So it's often a huge pressure that leaders undertake to be the people who come up with the ideas, who lead the business forward, and do it in good faith, and everybody follows. And I think as humans, we make mistakes, and leaders make mistakes. So being in a space where they can openly acknowledge their own mistakes and showing that imperfection is acceptable and actually part of continuous learning is so important. And I've seen many leaders do this brilliantly well, and many leaders not do it so well. So making sure that we create that space where we role model that is so important. And sharing personal stories as well, I think, is also really important. So bringing some of your experience into the workplace to show people that you are also human and you have humility will encourage other people to also do the same. So I would say that being a role model, being open around vulnerability, and also asking for feedback. Leaders do not and should not feel the pressure to constantly have to do everything themselves. As Sue talked about, the innovation culture, making sure you're seeking feedback and encouraging voices to share ideas, and doing that through feedback can show that people's voices are heard and they're valued. And I think that's such a huge part of creating that psychologically safe environment. And we want to encourage people to speak up. So asking questions, acknowledging contributions, celebrating learning from failure. You know, if you've done a project and it hasn't worked, let's understand what didn't work, what did work, and let's think about how we can do it better. Making sure that our comms, our communication internally are inclusive. So creating spaces for everyone to have an opportunity to speak. It's not just about the speaking as well as the listening. So making sure from an organizational perspective, there are opportunities for people to share their perspectives without other people interrupting or dismissing. So being able to do that in a very comfortable space is important, and avoiding that negativity. I think sometimes people fear sharing their ideas because they're nervous about what people might say or what people might think about their perspectives. So making sure that we're creating an inclusive environment where people can discuss things without that fear of consequence or negative consequence is really important. I think also from a practical perspective, to create a psychologically safe culture, having safe channels for feedback. So we've talked in the past, Paul, about that anonymous feedback mechanism, and having an opportunity of people, because all this stuff takes time. It's not something that you can just switch a light and suddenly you've got a psychological safe environment. You need to spend a lot of time building the trust within an organization. So allowing opportunities and channels for anonymous feedback is great. Creating spaces where people have an open door policy, where they can speak to different members of the team within an organization, is also really important. And then back to the basics of what we encourage our managers to do, those regular check-ins, making sure that any concerns are addressed, making sure that those discussions are done in a low pressure setting where people feel comfortable to be open. And then from a practical perspective, Sue's touched on this already. How do we measure and monitor psychological safety is something that needs to be an ongoing process. So we love to use surveys. That is really helpful to get a touch point of a specific time to really understand how people are feeling, but also tracking progress. There are lots of different elements that we can be thinking about in terms of, from an HR perspective, from absence to mental health to effective line management, retention, around how all of those metrics feed into that culture that we're trying to build. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm kind of listing out these things. You've got leaders that are vulnerable, they're open, they learn from mistakes, right? You're talking about environments where feedback's encouraged, where we celebrate success. And these are workplaces that a lot of people want to work for, right? So there's kind of competitive advantage in having those types of cultures. And we, given our backgrounds and on the call today, we would kind of all encourage these things by default anyway. But unfortunately, some workplaces aren't like that. And therefore, legislation has now been needed to help encourage this. So we've talked about the bottom line and how it's something you would want anyway. But the Worker Protection Act, which just came out about 6 weeks ago when it came live, let's talk about that now. What do you feel are the key requirements of employers with the new Worker Protection Act, and how does it intersect with what we've been talking about today in terms of psychological safety?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul, and it's interesting. I don't think a huge amount of coverage has really been seen about the Worker Protection Act. We work with lots of businesses to explain what is coming for them, and this kind of hit us in October this year. And the main essence behind this act is really just that significant shift from the kind of balance of power between employers and employees to create a safer, fairer, and more respectful work environment. So as a starting point, there are three things that are really important to know about this act. The first one is the proactivity that is required by employers to really now have to take all reasonable steps to prevent harassment in the workplace. And this is massive. Harassment has gone under the radar in terms of reporting for such a long time. And so this shift really pushes the emphasis on the reactive measures that organizations have got in place to more proactive ones. How can we get to a place in work where we're preventing these incidents from happening in the first place? So that's the first one. The second one is enhanced protections against harassment. So the Worker Protection Act kind of revives employer liability for third-party harassment. So making sure that it's a safer environment, especially for workers and customers facing roles, is super important. And the third kind of thing that I think is really important for us to really focus on in this conversation today is the impact on workplace culture. So I think moving from where we are right now to a real shift into zero tolerance for harassment is going to be hugely empowering for employees who come to work. Nobody wants to come to work to be harassed. Making sure that there are clear channels to report misconduct without fear of retaliation, and that's the big one. We've got a lot of work to do here. Creating spaces where we can foster trust. Again, from an organizational perspective, we all have a lot of work to do here, and create more transparent workplaces, which is what right now people are asking for on a regular basis through engagement surveys, through workplace studies. People are wanting more of that from their employers. So I think it's a massive game changer.
Sue, anything you'd want to add on that? Thank you, Aliya.
Yeah, Aliya's covered it really, really beautifully, and I can only echo the shift from reactive to proactive. That's the biggest piece that we've been communicating to all of our clients, and of course internally at Journey HR as well. And it's that huge shift from, waiting for something to happen and then yikes, what do we do? Right, let's investigate it, let's sort it out. It's that real shift from it should never have happened in the first place. And these are all the things we've done as an organization to ensure that it's not going to happen to the best of our abilities. And I think it's the zero tolerance piece is critical. It's interesting, we're working with a company at the moment. We've partnered with them in terms of delivering some training alongside them, some e-learning to support this. And I think, from their perspective, they sort of came at this in terms of saying, can we put a badge up and let people sort of sign up to this and say, we're a harassment-free workplace. And that's huge, and it's ambitious, and it's exactly what we all want to say, right, about our organizations that we work for and that we're proud of. So much of that is outside of our control. We can only do so much to try and prevent it, but I think the shift to prevention is critical, and all the risk assessment work that's come with it that's so strategic and so valuable. Step by step. I think our risk assessment might be 14 pages long. It's massive, but just thinking about all the different risks that pose themselves to the people that work for us, the people that work with our clients, and trying to mitigate each one of them and second guess it and think, well, what would we do about that, so that it is that really preventative lens instead of the one where you kind of go, oh heck. That's what I've really taken from it.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Now, we see the news every day, unfortunately, with organisations hitting the headlines for the wrong reasons. The new legislation places a strong emphasis on preventing sexual harassment. What practical advice would you give to leaders who are feeling overwhelmed by these new requirements? And we talked earlier about some, it's only 6 weeks in, right? And some organisations aren't aware of what these changes are. So yeah, any tips you've got for leaders who are thinking, okay, what do we have to do here?
Where do I start? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably continues on a little bit on what I was just saying there, that the risk assessment is a wonderful place to start, because it is literally the kitchen sink. It's a wonderful place where you think, how are we doing? What have we got down? Where are we red, amber, green? Where have we got risks? Where are we exposed, and what are we going to do about it? And that really allows you to break down tasks. So it is overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be, because you can bunch it into sections. You can start thinking about your third parties. You can think about the social element. So when your teams are out with third party providers, or they're out with each other at Christmas parties, very topical at the moment. So you can break down the risks, the risks that happen in work when people come in and out of reception. That's one area of risk. Obviously, as I say, the social element, maybe the interactions with suppliers, providers, whatever it is. And then you can break it down and think, okay, how are we doing and what do we need to do? And I think one big thing that I've learned from doing a number of risk assessments now for ourselves at Journey, and also for my clients, is to engage. So engage people to help you, engage people within HR, engage your ops team, engage IT, engage leadership, engage everybody, because everyone needs to lean in and help. You can't do this on your own. So there was risk around IT, thinking about the policies that you need to put in place in order to protect people when they're in online meetings. You know, who's got the expertise for that? Right, let's talk to the CTO so that we can work out how best to protect from an IT perspective. And then you turn the lens to the operations team when you're talking about the flow through the office in terms of visitors and suppliers, etc. So you're not alone. Lean on experts in the different sections of your organization so that they can help you pick up their area of expertise.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We've talked about anonymity a few times today. So we have a lot of experience of anonymity, right? It's a really core part of the Trickle platform. We've had a kind of mixed bag of experience with anonymity. I think if we go back 5 years to when we started and released the platform, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of fear of anonymity. If you're going to give people the ability to speak up anonymously, you know, what does that mean if they can say anything? So, you know, we've had to think a lot about the potential for abuse, and we've got a lot of good technology around that. But it's starting to change, right? I've seen that over the last year or two, where people are more open to anonymity. And with the new Worker Protection Act requirements, there's a requirement to give what we call safe reporting systems, right? And really that means anonymity, doesn't it? What's your view on that? What part does anonymous reporting play in the overall requirements?
Do you want to take this one, Aliya, or do you want me to?
Well, I know you're really passionate about this, but I think yeah, there's some real challenges. I'll give you my 5 cents on this one. I think, Paul. I think anonymity is an essential kind of bedrock foundation where if people don't have that trust in the system, they have a space to go.
Yeah.
So Sue and I worked in HR for 20 odd years, and we have dealt with many conversations where people have not wanted to raise anything formally and have wanted to remain anonymous. And I'm going to leave Sue to share her perspectives around it, but I think it is really hard for companies to deal with anonymous reporting in a way where the right and appropriate solution can be implemented. So I'm going to leave you to pick that one up.
It is really tricky, and it is obviously ideal to preserve that anonymity, especially if the person who's reported the situation is very passionate about that and feels rather vulnerable, and all of the things associated with it. So you would always lead with that, but I think what's really important to be almost realistic, really. As Aliya says, we've been doing this for well over 20 years, and I think we know that you've got to sort of set out the potential right at the beginning. When somebody reports something through, you kind of have to say to them right in that moment, I can't help you unless you let me take this. So I have to do something with what you've reported, and I know it's hard, and I know you may not want to do this, but let me take it. So sometimes when that person is feeling very vulnerable and they absolutely don't want to go on the record and they just want to leave it with you and let you fix it, what I've done in the past is then I've taken that case, it's in HR terms, it's called you take it out of their hands and you process it on behalf of the company. So you can preserve anonymity to a degree, and you can say the company takes issue with what's being reported. It doesn't matter who said it, the company has an issue. So you can take it forwards with that level of backing if it's super serious, and obviously it needs to be dealt with, and it can't just stay in the one-to-one room under wraps. It has to be taken beyond that. So I've done it that way, and that works. But often what happens is at some point in there, you have to explain who or what it was in terms of the situation that happened. Otherwise, it's really difficult, because the person or people who are being accused or alleged to have done something, it's very hard then to explain what it was and what the issue is without the context. And sometimes if you dance around the context, you get nowhere, because the person will be completely confused or defensive or trying to hide or whatever it is. You could have all manner of reactions to this. You could have genuine confusion. I don't know what you mean. I'm sorry. You could have defensive behaviours too. So right at the outset, I will often say to the person who is the victim, it may be that we need to just say that it was you, but I will not ask you to present anything more to me. I won't ask you to come to the room again. I've got enough from you. You don't have to talk about this again. Leave it with me. But it may well be that I need to explain who it was and why. And I think that's really important, because it's also not fair to the person who is trying to then explain what went on if they don't know what it was.
Yeah. One of the areas that we've focused on is in the platform is helping people to have that initial conversation, right? So maybe you don't know who to speak to. Maybe your personality type makes that difficult. Maybe it's just the incident itself that makes you uncomfortable. And what we've focused on is giving tools where within your organization you can say, right, I've got a choice of people that I can speak to here. I can remain anonymous. I can have that conversation. But then what we tend to see happening from feedback is that people get that initial conversation in the safe way. And this is not always like sexual misconduct, by the way. This can be any kind of thing that they want to speak up about in the workplace where they feel, actually, I need to do this privately. And they then feel that they've actually got that initial support. They've got a relationship. In a lot of the cases, they'll then say, actually, I'm now going to tell you who I am, and I can reveal a little bit more about the circumstances. But for us, we feel the area we can help is that initial contact, right? So that you're joining people up in the organization as someone that can help. And I think that's the important bit. But yeah, totally agree. You obviously need the context, etc., to be able to then and look at root causes, etc., as well. I'm going to take it back to metrics. We've talked about this earlier. You might feel we've already covered it, but are there any particular metrics or indicators that HR teams can use to measure the effectiveness of the environment in terms of the Worker Protection Act and complying with that?
It's a good question. I think metrics, from my perspective, something that we haven't touched on yet is competence around this area. So from our perspective, we've always kind of taken the approach that for an organization to truly understand their obligations, they need to train themselves to understand what it is we're actually talking about. So what does harassment look like in the workplace? What are behaviours that we want to see? What are behaviours we don't want to see? And where do people go to be able to report these behaviours? And who in the organisation will take those responsibility to then do something with that information? So training for us has been a really important metric for as a starting point. Educate. Let's understand what we are all here to do, and what is the organisation's responsibility, and what is my own personal responsibility as an employee. If I see something that I think should not be happening, what do I do? If I experience something that is happening that I don't feel comfortable about, what should I do? So education is one metric that I think baseline just needs a tick. Everybody needs to be on the same page with that one. See, what are your thoughts? Yeah, because I think training is an important thing that, whilst it's a difficult topic to hold people in a room for an hour to talk about, I think it's a really important baseline to really make sure that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely, and I think we can also come back to the regular, the biannual or annual surveys that we will advocate that our organisations and clients do. obviously Trickle's brilliant for this as well, in terms of the sort of regular pulsing and understanding what is going on in that organisation. But it is very much around having the right questions, isn't it? Having those right questions at the right time, and making sure that leaders are able to sort of unpack the feedback coming back. I think certainly in our survey we have a question related to this, don't we, Aliya, in terms of, how safe do you feel in the organisation? We talk about inclusivity. We talk about whether people in the organisation feel safe to speak up, whether they feel practice is fair and equitable. So I think as part of that annual pulse point, to find out what that sentiment is and what the sort of barometer check is inside your organisation, it is important to make sure that survey, whatever it looks like, goes beyond the standard set of employee satisfaction questions. Let's really ask the exam question and find out how we're doing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Right, I'm going to go to some of the questions we've got. So one here from Nicola Thompson. Thank you, Nicola. The question in the chat is, you mentioned getting a baseline. Would you recommend the 7-question diagnostic tool by Amy Edmondson and OK to do yourself as a team?
Yeah, Amy's great. And Amy inspired quite a lot of the work that I've been doing alongside one of my clients at Behave around psychological safety. So yeah, absolutely, she's a real guru on this, and I think her seven topics, 7 questions are absolutely fantastic. They will tap into the things that we spoke about in terms of the vulnerability piece, the bit around the comfort zone, thinking about how you disagree productively, how you participate, how you lean in, that sort of willingness to examine stuff and really check it for whether it's the right thing that we should be continuing to do, which obviously breeds innovation. And her questions will also look at collaboration as well. So they will look at whether people are encouraged to share thoughts together and collaborate, and also on the flip side of that sort of discomfort element of collaboration can go towards a willingness to say, I don't know, so I'm collaborating with you, but there's a limit to my knowledge, and I'm really enjoying learning from you because I actually don't know. So that's a lovely additional piece to psychological safety. But she will go into those areas. So 100% she is a favourite of mine for sure.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sue. Let's talk a little bit about resistance, right? So whenever there's a need for change, then we're all humans, right? Resistance is a very natural thing. The Worker Protection Act might need change in the organisation in terms of culture. It will certainly need change in terms of the way that risks are assessed, etc. How should HR professionals address resistance or scepticism from employees or managers who might not see the immediate need for cultural change related to the Worker Protection Act?
Great question. I think the natural go-to that we see a lot when we read up about this stuff, which I don't feel comfortable about, is the fear-mongering approach. So if you don't get this right, you might end up with a big lawsuit, you might end up with a big claim, and this is going to cost you a lot of money. I don't necessarily feel that that's always the best way to influence people. You want people to feel and accept the benefit of this and the impact, the positive impact it's going to have on your workplace culture. So I would always refrain from the doom mongering and the scaremongering, because ultimately, it's 1 in a million where these situations happen. It's making sure that leaders understand the benefit, the positive benefit. And we've talked a lot about the positive benefit just around psychological safety at work today. It's an easy sell. It's hard work, but maneuvering any group of people within an organization through a change process requires everyone to understand the purpose of that change, and for 100%. That to be communicated, and for people to feel that they're connected to that, which I think sadly, since COVID, people's sense of connection with organizations has dipped. We've got a lot of hard work to do together, I think, within organizations to bring that connection back, or perhaps even make the question, or ask ourselves the question, has it changed forever? And what is our realistic expectation of all of us together when we come to work? and what do we want to get out of it? So yeah, the big questions, I think, Paul.
Yeah, they are. And I like how you've kind of turned it on to the benefits of psychological safety, right? We talked at the start about the bottom line and, you know, how there are a number of benefits in terms of the growth of the business, not just financially, but, you know, the growth of the people within the business. I think the way we like to look at it is if you have psychological safety, you've got this great environment where people can say, why are we doing this? And we could be doing that instead, and here's the benefits we'd have. But then we've also got the safety net of anonymous reporting below that if you feel that you've kind of fallen back and you really need to speak to somebody one-to-one. But yeah, massive benefits of psychological safety. I think we're all sold on that. I think the challenge, as I said, as I see it, is sometimes getting the funding, right, to say, right, we need to make some change and here's what it's going to cost us to do it. There's a question about what the Act is actually called. Rebecca, thanks for posting that. It's actually called the Worker Protection Act 23, I think, isn't it? Even though it only went live 6 weeks ago. It's one of these ones where I was like, okay, it went live in October 24, but it's called the Worker Protection Act 23, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a variation to the Employment Rights Act, so it's an addition to that. But it was approved in Parliament in 23, but it was brought into force on the 26th of October. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, let's end right on the future. Okay. So between you both, what gives you the most hope when it comes to creating safer, more inclusive workplaces for future generations?
I mean, for me, it's got to be about engagement, hasn't it? It's got to be about all the lovely stats that we talked about at the beginning in terms of, reduced absenteeism and much lower turnover and all the things that we all strive for in terms of having our best people stay with us for longer. So I think if we can garner that environment where it is far more inclusive, far more open, far more psychologically safe, then that gives me a lot of hope. And I think as we look at the changing workforce, we've got shifting already. I think we're into sort of 50-60% very soon in terms of Gen Z. And we know that they will be far more vocal and good, great. Let's bring it on, but they will hold us to account. And I say us, I'm talking about myself and Aliya as known Gen call as an absolute minimum. And they will hold leadership to account and themselves, and they will raise it, and that is good. And I think therefore, if the environment that we have lent into and provided allows for that, again with that psychological safety backdrop, then we'll get so much more from the workforce that is up and coming and will absolutely take over as a generation. I also think having much stronger sort of legal frameworks that we're used to using, that it becomes general patter. We've shifted from, as I said, perhaps half an hour ago, the reactive oh dear to this should never happen. Look at all the things we've put in place. Look at all the policies. And it's not just policies. Let's bring it to life. Let's live and breathe it. These are all the things that we are living every day to ensure that none of this is tolerable. So I do think it is, I have a lot of hope that there will be quite a huge cultural shift if we all lean in and do what's right. Brilliant.
Aliya, anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, Sue has summed up everything in terms of my hopes. I think that the only addition that I can add to this conversation is life is short, and we spend a lot of time working and creating workplaces that are fair, inclusive, transparent, and places that we want to come and deliver our best work. For me, is magical. And if we can create that magic, and if we can build sustainable organizations that really invest in all of this stuff and get it right, I think the world would be a happier place.
Brilliant. We're going to end on that note. We're out of time. I really massively enjoyed that conversation. Thanks so much to you both, Aliya and Sue, for sharing your wonderful wisdom and insights with us all today. Big thanks to everyone that's joined in, taking the time out to join us today. I hope you've all got some tips and insights that you can take back to help improve your workplaces. Just before you go, I'd like to quickly tell you about an offer that we've got on at Trickle between now and January the 17th. Anyone who schedules a short discovery call with us will not only learn how Trickle helps support compliance with the Worker Protection Act and help embed a more safer and more inclusive culture, but you'll also receive a 20% discount on your first 12 months of Trickle. So we will share a scheduling link in our follow-up email. So please look out for that when it comes out this afternoon. We'll be back again in January. So again, keep an eye out on socials, especially LinkedIn, for what our next session will be. In the meantime, thank you once again. I hope you all have a fantastic time over the festive period. Have a good day. Thanks, folks.